when redrafting draft classes that just happened recently becomes much harder to do simply for the fact that a lot of these players haven't even entered their primes yet. Many of them could suddenly have breakout seasons in the coming year or two, which would completely change a redraft selection. And for this class in particular, a lot of these guys are set to become restricted free agents as their rookie contracts expire if they haven't been extended already, which would mean if they go to a new team, that could completely shift their overall development for good or bad. So I guess the point of what I'm trying to say is, I'm sure 2 or 3 years from now, we could look back on this video and realize how off base this was relative to some of the players that have developed a little later in their careers. But be all of that as it may, we're going to be redrafting the 2019 NBA draft based on what we know of the players today, nearly 4 years after said draft, a class that was really expected to be a top 3 heavy draft, and outside of that was considered to be a fairly weak draft class, but ended up becoming a deeper class than most anticipated, with some steals that went later on in the draft. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a video. We are just a few hundred subs away from 10,000 subscribers, at which point I'll be doing a jersey giveaway for 2 lucky winners for a jersey of their choice. And once again, I cannot thank you guys enough for all the love and support on the channel over the past few months since starting it. But anyway, let's get into this redraft. So going into the 2018-19 season, everyone knew by that point that Zion Williamson was the prize of the draft, considered to be a generational talent, one of the greatest prospects of the decade, with his sheer size, strength, combined with athleticism, his amazing leaping abilities, scoring, defense, you name it. The thought was that if you were able to snag Zion, you had a franchise player that you could build around for years to come. And while that does still hold true today, Zion is an incredible talent, one of the better players in the league, set to become an all-star for the second time. Injuries have been a concern and have kept him off the court for a good portion of his career, including missing all of last season. And as a result of that, it does put into question his overall potential and ceiling if the man has a hard time staying healthy throughout his career. Zion was of course selected number 1 overall by the New Orleans Pelicans, and this is such a hard one because I feel Zion does still have the highest ceiling out of anyone from this class. I have a hard time seeing him reaching that ceiling though, based on what we know today. As such, instead of drafting Zion number 1 overall, the Pelicans are going to select Ja Morant here with the first pick. Now, don't get me wrong, Ja has also had his challenges with injuries, but nothing to the extent that Zion has. And while I don't think Ja has as high of a ceiling as Zion Williamson does, you can't deny that Morant has already reached superstardom in such a short period of time in the league, being only 23 years old, won Rookie of the Year, was Most Improved Player of the Year last season, was selected second team All-NBA, an elite scorer and passer. And what's crazy about Ja is how gifted of a scorer he is by not relying heavily on the 3-ball. In fact, he's not really that great of a 3-point shooter in general, shooting 32% for his career on 4 attempts per game. It's his insane quickness and slashing ability in getting the basket that makes him so crafty in getting buckets, and it's why I have him ahead of Zion, at least for this point in time anyway. With the second pick, this is where the Grizzlies selected Ja Morant, and really at the time of the draft, everyone knew it was going to go Zion 1, Ja 2. Wasn't much of a surprise for the Grizzlies to take Ja with that selection, but in this instance, since Ja was taken number 1, we're going to swap these picks and the Grizzlies are going to take Zion number 2. As I mentioned, Zion is still a generational talent. He's only going to continue getting better and better. He's really worked on his body when everyone thought that he was becoming overweight. He's slimmed down a bit, is much more mobile and agile in getting to the basket. Again, my only concern is whether Zion in fact can stay healthy throughout his career, or if he starts seeing a sharp drop off early in his career because of injuries. But even those concerns aside, I don't see how you can't take Zion 2 in this draft, in a redraft anyway, knowing the upside potential. The benefits far outweigh the injury risks, as it's also very possible he doesn't run into any major injuries for the rest of his career. With the third pick, this is where the New York Knicks selected RJ Barrett, and RJ was another player most mock drafts had going number 3 behind Zion and Ja. Barrett was the number 1 recruit coming out of high school that season though. Before Zion and RJ started their freshman season at Duke together, most had actually anticipated that RJ Barrett would be the number 1 overall pick in 2019, but that quickly became clear as the season wore on that Zion was definitely the better player. And while RJ Barrett has been good, no one's saying he's trash or a bust, but looking at the rest of this draft class and where he stacks up against other players drafted after him, he wouldn't go number 3 in a redraft. I do have him later on this list, but 3 is too high for RJ Barrett. Instead, I'm going to have the New York Knicks taking Darius Garland, who was eventually taken 5th by the Cavs. Garland, who recently started thriving when Colin Sexton went down with a season-ending injury last year, already an all-star, just turned 23, and even more upside potential before him, especially with the excellent supporting cast he now has around him. Great scorer, great outside shooter, one of the better playmakers in the league. So yeah, no question in a redraft, the Knicks would have taken Garland here. With the 4th pick, this is where the Lakers selected DeAndre Hunter, but then he was traded shortly thereafter as one of the pieces in the Anthony Davis trade to the Pelicans. The Pelicans then turned that pick around and made another trade of their own, trading Hunter to the Atlanta Hawks. And Hunter has been good, there's no question. A solid player. He's a bit of a unique case in that he's entered the league when he was 22, so a little older and more mature than most of his draft counterparts. I actually think Hunter is a fairly underrated player when you look at his overall numbers and the impact that he has on the game, and the eye test checks out as well with how much he hustles and works to get better. That being said though, I'm not having the Lakers take Hunter here. Instead, they're going to select Tyler Herro and actually keep that pick instead of trading it, and it would be so fitting to have a player like Tyler Herro who loves the limelight to be in Hollywood. The jokes aside though, Tyler Herro actually would have been a perfect fit on the Lakers now. They desperately need shooters and a player that can create his own shot. Herro foots the bill in being able to play on and off the ball. I'm not a big Herro fan. I'm not a big fan of his game because his defense is just so terrible, and I think his contract is going to be regrettable by the Heat down the line, but he's still one of the better players from this draft class and why I have him going 4th in a redraft. With the 5th pick, this is where the Cavs selected Darius Garland, but since he's off the board, I'm going to have them taking Keldon Johnson here. You know, Keldon Johnson isn't getting enough attention and recognition as he deserves because he's on a bad and rebuilding Spurs team, but the dude is a great scorer and keeps getting better with every passing season. Not a good defender, but plays with a ton of confidence on offense and has become a very versatile scorer with his ability to get to the hoop, but also improving his overall jump shot since entering the league, and I think he would be a nice fit on the Cavs here. With the 6th pick, this is probably where we got our first busted pick, or at least trending to be a busted pick. I always say it's too early to call a player a bust until it's been at least 5 years after the draft, but for Jarrett Culver, yeah, not looking good. He was drafted by the Suns, was then traded by the Suns to the Wolves in exchange for Cam Johnson and Dario Saric. Worked out for the Suns there, as he really hasn't panned out in being a top lottery pick that people thought he would be. Currently plays on the Hawks, but is barely in the rotation. So instead, the Suns are going to select Jordan Poole here. Poole, who went late in the first round to the Warriors, took him a little bit of time to develop as he was sent down to the G League for some time during his rookie season. And although he's had his struggles, I think the contract the Warriors gave him was a mistake when it came at the expense of letting other key role players go. But even with that aside, he's a great player, a great scorer, a very good ball handler and crafty in his ability to get to the basket. The reason I don't have him a little higher here is because I'm not sure I see a world in which Jordan Poole is as successful on a team outside of the Warriors, but 6 is still high considering he went 28th overall in that draft. With the 7th pick, this is where the Bulls took Kobe White, and while Kobe is okay, as a Bulls fan, I mean, he's had his flashes, but for the most part, a pretty inconsistent player, a streaky shooter, and while his overall IQ and decision-making, as well as his defensive ability, has improved since entering the league, I wouldn't consider Kobe to be a top 10 pick 4 years after the fact. As such, I'm having the Bulls taking Nick Claxton here, which, yes, I realize wouldn't have been the best fit for the Bulls considering they just drafted Wendell Carter Jr. the year before, but in my view, when looking at the long-term potential, the defensive ability that he displays, but also having the capability of being an effective two-way player with his improved offense averaging over 13 points per game so far this season for the Nets as their starting center. So because of all this, I'm treating this as a best player available scenario and figuring it out after the fact, maybe trading Wendell Carter Jr. down the line, which is what the Bulls ended up doing anyway. With the 8th pick, the Hawks selected Jackson Hayes before moving him as a part of that 3-team trade that sent Anthony Davis to the Lakers, and Hayes ended up going to the Pelicans. And for Hayes, I mean, he struggled, has shown some good flashes here and there. I do think in the right role, if he was able to get a little more playing time, he would have much more upside potential as a result of it. But thus far, he really hasn't panned out in the NBA. So instead, the Hawks here are going to select RJ Barrett, who we talked about before, was selected 3rd overall by the Knicks, got that big contract extension, and it's been a solid player. The biggest thing for me is how inefficient Barrett has been throughout his career. Super talented, very athletic. He can score in a hurry, but misses a lot of shots, not a good three-point shooter, not really a good playmaker, and is also bad on defense, but he's still good enough to warrant a top 10 selection, even in a redraft. With the 9th pick, the Washington Wizards selected Rui Hachimura, and I actually like Hachimura's game. He's been hit with injuries, and his role with the Warriors was obviously reduced over time because of guys like Kuzma and Denny Avdija. I'm curious to see how things are going to work out for him now that he's on the Lakers with a more prominent role. I do still think he would be a lottery pick in a redraft, but not top 10. So instead, I'm having the Wizards select Cam Johnson.
Wow. Wow, bro.
Yes, if you remember, Kobe White was shocked when Cam Johnson went as high as he did in the draft, getting selected 11th overall, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised that in a redraft, Cam Johnson would actually go higher than Kobe White. Johnson has been a really integral piece for the Phoenix Suns and the rise of that team, and he's been injured more recently, and it's been impacting the team as a whole in need of their role player like Johnson, who can score, great outside shooter, and give you decent defense. I like this pickup for the Wizards here over Hachimura as their starting four. And then with the 10th pick, this is where the Hawks used that first round pick that they received from the Dallas Mavericks in the Luka Doncic trade to trade down in the draft to get Trae Young, trading their 3rd pick to the Mavs for the 5th pick in 2018 and a first rounder, that pick in 2019, which ended up becoming the 10th selection. And I think we can all agree the Hawks are kicking themselves for that decision and trading away a future Hall of Famer and a top 5 player in the NBA, and then selecting Cam Reddish with that pick the following season, who they ended up having to move for a 2nd round pick later on. I still think Reddish has some upside potential. He's just never really been given much of a chance and is being wasted away in New York sitting on the bench. But with the 10th pick in this redraft, I'm having the Hawks take PJ Washington here. This was a toss-up for me between Washington and DeAndre Hunter, but I see more potential in Washington for the long term. He has his flaws, don't get me wrong, but he can put the ball on the ground, get to the hoop, a solid scorer, can shoot it from outside, decent shot blocker, not the best rebounder for a power forward, but whatever, maybe that will come with time. I also like the fit here on the Hawks, especially over someone like Cam Reddish, and feel Washington would do well alongside a great passer in Trae Young, even more so than alongside LaMelo Ball. And there you have it, redrafting the top 10 picks from the 2019 draft. Let me know where you guys would have drafted differently in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.